Good evening, everybody. Just checking in first, make sure you can hear me okay. Someone can give me a thumbs up. All right. Thank you, Linda and Brian. And Jean and Marisa. All right. I guess you can hear me okay. So welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll begin with Ruel. Thank you as well. Another thumbs up. We'll start by joining palms as we begin. And you can repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And keeping the palms joined. All right. And putting the palms down. So thanks all for being here. Welcome to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation. My name is Jeff. I like to start with a question, typically just to give people time to get settled in and just to get people engaged a little bit with each other. Welcome, Stacy. Always love having new people. Get tired of all you old folks after a while, you know. I mean, we should have it figured out by now, I would think. All right, question just to get us started. Well, I guess I'll go along that path. So for someone who's been around this stuff for a while, with what you've learned, what do you think is the most difficult? It's a pretty broad question. But these questions are good for you to reflect on as practitioners. Also good for new people to begin to kind of recognize what are challenges that other people might have. You know, you've all learned a lot over the years that we've been through this stuff around meditation, around the paramitas of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, wisdom. We've learned a lot about greed, anger, ignorance, you know, our awareness of our own karma and our actions, and the thinking good thoughts, speaking good words, doing good deeds, as I typically always end with. Of all these things, what's most challenging for you? And if you are here for the first time or just brand new, again, welcome. But maybe what led you here? You know, what were you, what kind of drove you in brief to show up? For me, it was realizing I could only live with anger and depression for so long before I figured out something else to do. So that's really what drove me to it 17 years ago. And that's different for every person. So again, the question, if you are just joining us, I'll go ahead and type it in here. And we'll take a few moments for people to respond. But what have you learned that is most difficult on your journey? And again, if new, why show up here? So again, if you are new, I like to get people engaged. So there's a chat box there on the screen. You can just chime in. Let's see, Brian, right effort. Procrastination is so tempting. Yeah, procrastination is just there constantly. So the effort, the diligence is very difficult. Taking full responsibility for myself is most difficult. Yeah. If we could just take half responsibility, if we could blame ourselves for half of our problems and then blame everybody else for the other half, that would be a lot easier, right? Not reacting to negativity, all very difficult, especially a time right now where there is so much negativity. Think good thoughts. Geez, can my thoughts go crazy? Yeah, definitely. Our thoughts can drive us wild. Denise, Eddie says his most difficult is remembering to speak good words. Well, I'm glad you have Denise to remind you. Maybe we'll just get Eddie a shirt instead of all three. We'll just get him a shirt that says "Speak Good Words." You can rock that next time. Amy, not sliding, I think it says, deliberately or unintentionally into comfortable but unhealthy thoughts and behavior. Sometimes I know it's not skillful, but do it anyways. Yeah, for sure. We've developed, so many of us, unhealthy thought patterns and behaviors for so long, so many years. And we know this is not healthy for us or not good for us. And yet we find ourselves doing it anyways. I don't know if any of you remember the movie Trainspotting, but there's a line in there where they say, it was at this moment we decided to never do heroin again. And then in the next scene, immediately there they are. So it goes to show you with addiction and really any sort of habits or behaviors that we have, they're addictions. Often, and I've worked in the recovery environment for 25 years. Often we think of addiction as drugs, alcohol, or maybe one or two other things, but really our thought patterns, our behaviors, our actions, these are also addictions. So keeping a beginner's mind, yeah, for sure. Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, probably my all-time favorite Buddhist book. It's difficult to always start over every moment and to realize that we have so much to learn every moment. Struggling with grief and trying to find some balance. Yeah, definitely, Stacy. And, the thing about Buddhist practice, and especially for a new person, I'll jump right to it, is that Buddhist practice doesn't always make things easier. It doesn't always make the grief any better or go away. For me, I've found that Buddhist practice just makes us sit with the grief a little bit better and sit with the loss or whatever it might be a little bit better. So the pain is still there, the missing is still there, but it's learning to embrace and be with things as they are, which sometimes and always is very difficult. Michael, I struggle with not taking negative things or criticism personally. Yeah, for sure. I mean, who doesn't, right? Most of us don't want to be criticized, but it happens quite often. Chuck, seeing the Buddha and everything is difficult, definitely. And for those who are new, I mean, it doesn't mean that you literally see the Buddha in someone. It's referring to Buddha nature. In essence, that we all have the ability to awaken. We all have the potential to awaken. So all the kindness and compassion and wisdom that the Buddha had really is available to all of us, and we often don't see it. So when we're angry at people, we don't want to see the Buddha nature in them. We just want to see the negative person. Samir, practicing under fire when tired or stressed, practice goes out the window and anger arrives. Yeah, it's a good thing you got those kids, Samir. They're going to keep teaching you, so thank them. But yeah, that's also very difficult. And last one here, practicing what I know I should be doing consistently. Yeah, the diligence is it's a tough one. I mentioned this a lot, but the Buddha's last teaching before he died was, he said, be enlightened to yourself and strive on with diligence. And to me, I take that as if this was his last teaching, if he taught for 45 years and decided to leave us all with one final teaching, and he said, be diligent, I think it goes to show you how important that is and also how difficult it is. So, all right, with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the meditation practice. There's a couple things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You won't float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is it working? Is it not working? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You're going to hear sounds wherever you are. Sounds inside, outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And the practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all the chaos. So don't judge your practice, especially if you're new. Don't ask yourself, is this working? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. Your mind will continue to race. I will say things periodically to bring you back to the present moment. You won't think nothing. Your mind won't go blank. It's going to race just as usual. So learn to be with that. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion or a chair, really slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important with this practice, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settling into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. We'll start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound, each thought, each physical sensation, yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. Letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from the practice, just sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, just as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. And ask yourselves how you'd prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in or where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way we responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how we respond every other 20 minutes of our lives. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, and focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun, but it's free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do is the heart of this practice. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction, life gets simpler. But it is a practice. So I appreciate you all being here and sitting. Welcome to those who are new. What I'd like to do now is open up to questions. If you are joining for the first time or maybe on a YouTube Live for the first time, there's a chat box there on your screen somewhere. Feel free to type in a question, anything around meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. I always prefer to use the time to respond to questions that you all have. So we'll use the rest of the time tonight for that. So feel free to go ahead and type in your questions. Questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you are sitting with at this moment. So the question, do you have any Buddhist advice for replacing or stopping negative thoughts? So I love the way the question is phrased. First starting with, do I have any Buddhist advice? As opposed to maybe any other device, or advice, I should say. When we look at negative thoughts, for me as a practitioner, I'm going to kind of rephrase that question. Amy, you've probably heard me say this before, but I'm a big fan of what my master used to teach me, which was rephrasing the questions. And instead of looking for answers, change the way we ask questions. So when I see this question, I would get rid of the word. I would replace the word replacing. And I think instead of trying to, and again, it's just semantics. So, and in just a type question, it's not exactly clear to know where you're coming from. But instead of trying to replace negative thoughts, I would work on cultivating a path and a practice where negative thoughts don't arise. I think that's much more beneficial. Now, I get it. We can have negative thoughts and we can think, okay, I want to replace it. But then what we're really doing is, not that I'm a fan of chopping down trees, but if you are just trimming the tree, it's going to keep growing back. And the practice really is to dig it out from the root if you want it to go away. So you can recognize negative thoughts and just say, there's a negative thought, I want to replace it with something positive. But the positive thought doesn't replace the negative thought. The positive thought becomes an add-on or a follow-up thought to the negative thought. So for me, again, the question would be, how do I stop negative thoughts from arising? And this is looking at our own karma, our own actions, and trying to put ourselves in situations, environments, ways of life that negative thoughts don't arise. So, for example, if watching the news brings negative thoughts, which it might, my suggestion would not be watch the news, recognize negative thoughts, and then change them to positive thoughts. My suggestion would be watch less news. If you find yourself in dialogue or conversation with certain people that constantly bring negative thoughts, then my suggestion would be try to remove yourself from those conversations or dialogues. My suggestion would be, if you are viewing yourself negatively or having negative thoughts about yourself, I'm not such a fan of just trying to trick ourselves. I would recognize that the ignorance that lies within us all, which is that our views are not correct. So any view we may have of ourselves that might be negative, recognize that's just a self-judgment, self-critique that we're throwing on ourselves. And that view is filled with ignorance. So if we know our view is filled with ignorance, then why would we have any negative thought about ourselves? So again, I mean, you're very intelligent and you can explore this and see how it plays out in your own world, but start to watch what triggers the negative thoughts and try to remove those things, if possible, from your life. And then I think negative thoughts will arise less frequently. And if negative thoughts arise less frequently, then you'll have less need to replace the negative thoughts with positive thoughts. Hopefully that's helpful. Ask me tomorrow and I'll answer it completely differently. But that's what I'm sitting with now. Do you have any recommended reading for someone new to Buddhism? Yeah, I'm a big fan of Lotus in the Stream. It's a book that's out of print. You can get it on Amazon. All the basic teachings of the Buddha, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, dependent origination, karma, rebirth, paramitas, all these core fundamental kind of buzzwords you'll hear in Buddhism, they're all summed up in about 15 pages, and I think very beautifully. Another one for me as a Zen practitioner is Zen Mind, Beginner Mind. I think that's an excellent book for helping someone understand how their mind really just creates so much pain and suffering just from our thoughts. So the ability to cut through that and stay in the present moment, I think, is critical. Buddha for You has a lot of books that are all geared towards beginners. It's closed, but you can just check the website or social media stuff. You'll see that there. And there's a lot of books there that are really, like I said, geared towards beginners. But I think Lotus in the Stream and Zen Mind, Beginner Mind are my two favorite recommendations. And the other thing, Stacy, as a beginner, is I wouldn't overwhelm yourself with reading like 15 Buddhist books. I would read a couple. I would, Google a few things, and I would join some meditation groups, Buddhist groups, as you are right now, and see how you feel, see what sits with you, see what resonates with you. The books can be often a bit overwhelming because they're coming from so many different perspectives and traditions and cultures and teachings. And the really fundamental basic teachings of the Four Noble Truths, which is life is filled with suffering, we suffer a lot. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering, which is greed, anger, ignorance. We overcome greed, anger, ignorance with the generosity, compassion, wisdom. The third one is the ending of suffering, that's nirvana. And the fourth noble truth is the path that leads to the ending of suffering. And that's the Eightfold Path. And that's working on having correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. These things are all available on Google for free. And I'm a big believer that you could spend your entire life just focused on those four noble truths, those practices. And you'll see how difficult they are to actually integrate them into your life. Buddhism is a practice and a way of life. It's not really this intellectual study it's an intellectual study, but of nothing but yourself. So hopefully that's helpful. Did the Buddha talk about self-compassion? Well, see, here's the interesting thing. A good question as far as did the Buddha talk about self-compassion? We talk a lot about self-compassion. Self-compassion is a beautiful, important thing. In a very modern day, present psychological framework, having compassion towards self, and I talk about this a lot, is critical. Must have love, must have compassion towards self. It's extremely important. If you have anger and hatred towards yourself, then your actions are going to be filled with anger and hatred. If you have compassion towards yourself, then you're coming from a place of love and compassion, and you can share that outward. But here's the funny thing about the Buddha's teaching on self-compassion. The Buddha taught that there's no self. So self-compassion is interesting in a sense that we have this story about ourselves. The Buddha said that this self is an illusion. It doesn't mean we don't exist, especially for someone who's new. It doesn't mean we don't exist. It doesn't mean we're not there physically. It just means that we exist completely differently from how we perceive ourselves to be. So the teachings of non-self are really important in Buddhist teachings to understand that we are not this permanent being that will never change. We are forever changing. Now, I think it's important to recognize that this view I have of myself should be filled with compassion. I think that's critical. The illusion that I have of myself, if I'm going to have this illusion of the self, I think it should be filled with compassion. But can we get to a place where we're abandoning the story, almost similar to the question that Amy asked, but can we get to a place where we're abandoning the story about ourselves, that we don't need to pour compassion onto ourselves? If you look at the second noble truth being the cause of suffering, which is greed, anger, ignorance, and you overcome anger with compassion. So by definition, the reason we would practice self-compassion is because we have self-anger or self-hatred or self-delusions. If we can move beyond this anger and hatred towards the self, then I think that we become almost by default kinder, compassionate people without having to pour all this self-compassion on top. Dig out the root of hatred and anger that's in your hearts and minds based on the story you're telling yourself. Abandon that story. The self falls away. This pride, this ego, these things that we attach and cling so much to, these stories fall away. If this falls away, who are you having compassion for? And again, I for whatever reason I'm taking this approach tonight. I will always take different approaches, but especially for those who are new, I'm not saying that compassion is not important. Compassion is critical. But we are so focused on compassion because we live with so much anger. We're so focused on self-compassion because we're so consumed with ourselves. We think ourselves are so important. And when we don't live up to who we think we are, or we don't live up to the expectations that other people think of us, then we have this sense of anger and hatred towards self. So everyone says, well, let's just pour compassion onto the self. The Buddha taught that there is no inherent self and go beyond that. So hopefully that's helpful. Mario, is there a difference between Chan and Pure Land? Yes. So Chan is the Chinese word for Zen. Very brief history, and I'm not a historian, but I know enough to make it sound like I maybe know what I'm talking about. When the Buddha taught, when he was alive, he taught what's called the flower sermon, Suture, and he held up a flower. And in this moment, they say that his disciple understood the teaching without any words. And it said that there was this mind-to-mind transmission of the Dharma, of the teachings of the Buddha. And so this teaching got passed on, this mind-to-mind transmission. Hui Neng is a very famous one. He's known as the sixth patriarch of what we often call Zen or Chan. I'll get to that in a minute in Buddhism. And then Bodhidharma, who was the 28th patriarch. He left India, went to China, and brought these teachings. In China, they became called Chan. Then they went to Japan, and they became called Zen. In the Western culture, we tend to call it Zen way more than Chan. The only reason people typically know Chan is if they go to a Chinese or Taiwanese Buddhist temple where they read books from that lineage or tradition. But most of our culture knows the word Zen. But Chan and Zen are the same thing. And it's a very specific Buddhist practice within the Mahayana tradition. Now, Pure Land is different from Chan, and the practice, and which interestingly enough, and you probably didn't know this about me, but the monastery I lived at in Taiwan, 2005 to 2006, was a mixture of Chan and Pure Land practice. Chan because the master was a Linshi or Rinzai Zen master, and Pure Land because the master from mainland China who was in Taiwan, and culturally within Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and other places, there is the practice of Pure Land, which is devoted to Amitabha Buddha. And you may have heard the phrase Namo Amida Butsu in Japanese or Namo Amitofo in Chinese. These are paying homage to, paying respects to Amitabha Buddha. Amitabha Buddha's name, the word Amitabha, Amitofo, Amida, means infinite light, boundless life. And so the Pure Land practice is based on Amitabha's 48 great vows. 46, 48, I think 48 great vows. And you could Google Amitabha's 48 vows and you could see them all there. And so this practice is a belief that you chant, recite the Buddha's name, follow precepts, meditate, to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land, where you are free from pain, free from suffering. To the average Western person, it sounds very much like a heaven. And sounds like a nice heavenly place to be. So simple answer is yes, there's a difference between Chan and Pure Land, but that's enough hopefully to get you started. A few more questions here. I recently read that in certain branches of Buddhism that the third seal of Dharma is nirvana rather than no self. Is that a rephrasing or truly different position? Talk amongst yourselves. So what I learned as the three Dharma seals are nirvana, no self, and impermanence. Now here's the thing with Buddhism. Every tradition, every master, every lineage is going to have slight variations. And so I think it's not so important to recognize which is right or wrong or which one's more correct than the other because they're all different. I mean, the Buddha lived, taught for 45 years, he died, and then 50 years later, or whatever it was, they wrote everything down. So nothing was even written down for 50 years, say. And they memorized it. And then they came together and said, this is some good stuff. And then they wrote it down. And then, the teaching stayed in India for 100 years or whatever it was, and then moved south into Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. 500, 600 years later, around the turn of the century, goes up to China, Japan, Korea. Right, 1,000 years after the Buddha died, it goes into Tibet. Maybe 100 years ago, it starts working its way west into the U.S., Europe, Canada. Really less than that, but so you have 2,500 years of Buddhist teachings that have spread to hundreds of millions of people. And then you pick up a book that talks about Dharma seals, and you may see differences. Again, I don't know what everyone teaches. I can tell you what I was taught as the three Dharma seals were nirvana, no self, and impermanence. So nirvana being liberation. The word nirvana literally means to extinguish. No self, which I talked about earlier, non-self, this idea that there is no permanent self. And impermanence, just understanding that, as I just said about self, everything is impermanent. All conditioned phenomena come together for a period of time and then cease to exist. So thanks, that helps. Good, Amy. Martha, is it possible to release thought altogether during meditation? Yes, helpful. Good. Stacy, Linda, Brian, good. I'm glad that it's helpful. So back to the question, is it possible to release thought altogether during meditation? So there's a Zen master, Dogen. He lived 1200 to 1253. He's the founder of what's called the Soto Zen school of Buddhism. There's two really major schools of Buddhism that have survived, Soto and Rinzai. And even though for me, being in a Chan, master being a Rinzai or Linchi master, and Pure Land practice, what I've probably read or studied more of is the Soto school. And Dogen, you can just Google Dogen, D-O-G-E-N. There's a great book called Beyond Thinking. And Dogen taught that as the mind and body fall away, you abide in sensation of breath. So to answer your question, is it possible to release thought altogether during meditation? Ultimately, I would like to say that the answer to that is yes. Does that mean we can do it? That's a whole nother story. And it's a really important thing to, I think, discuss. And maybe I'll just close with this thought. Um, oh, and thanks, Mario, for sharing that with Stacy. Um, it really is a good foundation for the book. But back to Martha, the important part about the teaching of body and mind fall away and you abide in sensation of breath is, I really suggest that one doesn't sit with, and this is why I'm hesitant to answer a question like that and say yes, because if I say yes, it's possible, now I've just planted in everybody's heads that there's this goal or objective that they're supposed to accomplish, such as releasing all thoughts. Then what can happen is all of a sudden I'm going to sit down to do my meditation, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, okay, release thoughts altogether. Release thoughts altogether. Release thoughts altogether. This isn't working. I'm not releasing thoughts altogether. So all I've done for however long of time is I've focused on releasing thoughts altogether, when in fact I've released no thoughts. So I think it's really important to, and the Zen practice is a concentration on the breath, to abide in sensation of breath. So as the Buddha taught in Anapanasati Sutra, he said, when you're breathing in and taking a short breath, know you're breathing in, taking a short breath. Breathing out, taking a long breath, know you're breathing out, taking a long breath. So focus on sensation of breath. But do that without the expectation, judgment, goal, or any idea of gaining anything. Don't think about enlightenment. Don't think about nirvana. Don't think about Buddhism. Meaning, don't set those up as these objectives or goals or accomplishments. Just attempt to abide in and focus on sensation of breath. Because whatever happens from there is what's going to happen from there. But telling yourself that you're going to release thoughts altogether, as long as you tell yourself that, it's probably never going to happen. Just tell yourself, I'm simply going to work on focusing on sensation of breath. And you'll see how hard that is. So we did this practice, and I'll close with this thought. We did this practice in the monastery where the first round was you would breathe in, breath out, count 1. Breath in, breath out, count 2. Breath in, breath out, count 3. We'd go 1 to 10, 10 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 1. Then breathing in, the second series would be breathing in, breathing out, count 1, but you actually would visualize the number being drawn. So breath in, breath out, 1. I would visualize my hand drawing a 1. I didn't actually do it, but that's what I would visualize. Breath in, breath out, I would visualize 2. Breath in, breath out, I would visualize 3. Continued. 1 to 10, 10 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 1. The next is you would visualize it being drawn as a color. Breath in, breath out, 1, red. Breath in, breath out, 2, red. Breath in, breath out, 3, red, etc. 1 to 5, or 1 to 10, 10 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 1. And the last thing would be to do that, but as you draw it, you would see the number expand and come back. So breath in, breath out, 1 in red. Visualize the number getting larger. Visualize it coming back. 2, red. Visualize it getting larger. Visualize it coming back. Boom. So it was a pretty intense concentration practice. So that's my experience. So that I'll close. We can join palms as we do a transfer of merit. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. So a few quick announcements before you all head out. And good, Martha, I'm glad that made sense. Thanks for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up the temple 14 years ago to introduce Buddhism to local folks who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students. We're just practitioners. We do our best to take our unenlightened understanding of Buddhist teachings and share it with those who show up. So every night we have classes going on in different traditions. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Alex, Travis, and myself are on YouTube. Saturday morning, I do that as well. Everything else is on Zoom. All of our recovery classes, just about every day. Morning meditation, Monday through Friday. Family group, teenage group, college group. Everything else is on Zoom. The website, thedharmabums.org, has the calendar and the schedule. Really, the heart of the practice is think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. So focus on that. We've been closed since March 12th, so coming up on, what is that, I think 9 months. But I'm very pleased we've been able to transition about 90% of our schedule online, and grateful to all the volunteers who lead and make all that happen. So thanks all for being here. Again, the temple is still closed. Buddha for You is still closed. You can get stuff online with Buddha for You now, though. So if you need anything, just check that out or let me know. Thanks for being here. I wish you all a good evening. And be safe, wear a mask, stay home, and let's not do anything that gets anybody any more sick than the world already is.